In the quiet stillness between your thoughts, there exists a profound truth that has guided seekers for thousands of years. Imagine for a moment that within your own mind lies a sanctuary of peace so vast and boundless that no external circumstance could ever disturb it. What if I told you that according to Zen Buddhism, this sanctuary isn't something you need to create? It's something you already possess. Stay with us as we explore the ancient wisdom of Zen that teaches us how to uncover our true nature. A nature that remains undisturbed even in the midst of life's greatest storms. The journey of Zen is not about adding something new to your life, but rather about removing the layers of confusion that prevent you from recognizing what has always been there. It is about seeing through the illusions that cause us to suffer and returning to our original face, the face we had before we were born. This journey isn't meant to be merely philosophical. It is intensely practical, offering time-tested tools for navigating the challenges of everyday existence with greater ease and clarity. In the words of an old Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The profound simplicity of this teaching reveals a fundamental truth. Zen isn't about escaping life, but about being fully present within it. It's about discovering extraordinary meaning in ordinary moments and finding freedom, not by changing our external circumstances, but by transforming our relationship to them. Consider for a moment how much of your suffering comes not from the events themselves, but from your resistance to them. When rain falls on your wedding day, is it the rain itself that causes distress? Or is it your attachment to how the day should have been? When someone speaks harshly to you, is it their words that hurt? Or your clinging to how you wish they had spoken? Zen invites us to examine these questions deeply, not as intellectual exercises, but as gateways to genuine liberation. The essence of Zen lies in its directness. It doesn't ask you to believe in complex philosophical systems or to adopt elaborate rituals. Instead, it points directly to your own mind as the source of both your suffering and your freedom. Through practices like Zazen, sitting meditation, we learn to observe the mind without becoming entangled in its constant movement. We discover that thoughts arise and pass away like clouds in the sky, and that we are not those thoughts but the vast awareness in which they appear. Imagine standing by a river, watching leaves float downstream. Some leaves move quickly, others slowly. Some get caught in eddies before continuing their journey. This is how Zen teaches us to observe our thoughts, not by trying to stop the river, but by watching it flow without attachment. When we cease identifying with every thought that crosses our mind, we begin to experience a profound shift in our relationship to life itself. A Zen master once asked his disciples, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" This koan, or paradoxical riddle, isn't meant to be solved through logic, but to exhaust the analytical mind and create an opening for direct insight. In the space beyond concepts and categories, beyond the endless chatter of the thinking mind, lies the possibility of awakening to what has always been here. True freedom, from the Zen perspective, doesn't come from controlling our environment or from getting what we want. It comes from releasing our grip on how we think things should be and meeting life exactly as it is. This doesn't mean passive resignation or giving up on positive change. Rather, it means acting from a place of clarity and presence, rather than from reactivity and delusion. Consider the story of the farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors came to console him, saying, "What bad luck?" The farmer simply replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it several wild horses. "What good fortune!" exclaimed the neighbors. "Maybe," responded the farmer. Later, the farmer's son was thrown while trying to tame one of the wild horses and broke his leg. "How terrible," sympathized the neighbors. "Maybe," said the farmer. The following week, military officials came to the village to draft young men into the army, but the farmer's son was passed over because of his broken leg. "What good luck," said the neighbors. "Maybe," replied the farmer. This story illustrates the Zen understanding that life unfolds in ways we cannot predict or control. Our judgments about what is good or bad are based on limited perspective and often prove premature. By suspending these judgments and remaining open to the unfolding of life, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering and align more deeply with reality as it is. The practice of zazen, or sitting meditation, forms the heart of Zen training. In zazen, we simply sit, allowing everything to be as it is. This might sound easy, but anyone who has tried to sit still for even 5 minutes knows the restlessness of the untrained mind. Thoughts cascade endlessly. The body fidgets and discomfort arises. Yet it is precisely by sitting with these experiences, not trying to change them, but simply observing them with kind attention, that we begin to discover a deeper dimension of being. When we sit in zazen, we aren't trying to stop thinking or to achieve some special state. We're simply learning to be present with whatever arises. As the Japanese Zen master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. This forgetting of self doesn't mean erasing our identity, but rather seeing through the illusion of a separate, solid self that stands apart from life. In our everyday lives, we often move through the world as if we are separate from it, as if there is me in here and the world out there. This sense of separation creates a fundamental anxiety, the feeling that I am small and vulnerable in a vast and potentially threatening universe. Zen practice helps us recognize that this boundary between self and world is not as solid as we imagine. In moments of clear seeing, we might recognize that we are not separate from the world, but are the world experiencing itself in a particular way. This recognition doesn't happen through intellectual understanding alone. It emerges through direct experience, through moments when the chattering mind falls silent and we touch life directly. Perhaps you've had glimpses of this while watching a sunset, during moments of creative flow, or in times of great joy or sorrow when the usual boundaries of self seem to dissolve. Zen practice helps us cultivate the conditions for such insights to arise more frequently and to inform our everyday lives. One of the core teachings of Zen is the principle of non-duality, expressed in the Heart Sutra as form is emptiness, emptiness is form. This teaching points to the inseparability of the material world, form, and the boundless, ungraspable nature of reality, emptiness. Every object, every experience, every thought has these two aspects. It appears solid and real, yet when we look deeply, we find that it is also fluid, interconnected, and impossible to pin down. Consider a wave in the ocean. From one perspective, The wave appears as a distinct entity with its own characteristics. It has a certain height, shape, and movement. Yet from another perspective, the wave is inseparable from the ocean itself. It is made entirely of water, continuously changing, eventually merging back into the vastness from which it arose. So too with our experiences, our emotions, even our sense of self. They arise temporarily, have their moment, and pass away, all within the boundless field of awareness. This understanding transforms our relationship to suffering. When difficult emotions arise, anger, fear, grief, we can recognize them as waves in the ocean of our consciousness. We don't need to suppress them or be overwhelmed by them. We can allow them to move through us with awareness, knowing they are temporary manifestations rather than defining truths about who we are. A famous Zen story tells of a monk who asked his teacher, "It is very hot, and how shall we escape the heat?" The teacher replied, "Why not go to the place where there is no heat?" The monk inquired, "Where is the place where there is no heat?" The teacher said, "When heat comes, heat kills. When cold comes, cold kills." This enigmatic response points to a profound truth. Freedom isn't found by escaping uncomfortable conditions, but by meeting them completely, without adding the extra layer of resistance that turns physical discomfort into mental suffering. In our daily lives, we spend enormous energy trying to arrange conditions to be just right. The perfect job, relationship, home, body. Zen doesn't dismiss the relative importance of these things, but reminds us that true peace doesn't depend on getting everything exactly the way we want it. Rather, it comes from finding the place within that remains undisturbed regardless of external conditions, like the depths of the ocean that remain still even when the surface is tossed by storms. The practice of mindfulness in Zen isn't about creating pleasant experiences or achieving states of bliss. It's about developing the capacity to be present with whatever arises, pleasant or unpleasant, without being carried away by it. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. On the contrary, by not wasting energy in resistance to what is, we become more capable of clear and effective action. Consider the difference between walking on ice while tense and afraid of falling, versus walking with a relaxed awareness that responds fluidly to changing conditions. The tense walker is actually more likely to fall because their rigidity prevents them from adapting moment by moment. Similarly, when we approach life's challenges with rigid expectations and resistance, we reduce our capacity to respond skillfully. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, a quality of openness and curiosity that isn't limited by preconceptions. Shunryu Suzuki, who brought Zen to America, famously said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." When we approach each moment freshly, without imposing our ideas of how things should be, we discover new possibilities for responding to life's challenges. This beginner's mind is particularly valuable in times of significant change or uncertainty. When familiar structures fall away, a relationship ends, a job is lost, health declines, we naturally want to grasp for security and control. Zen invites us instead to remain open to not knowing, to allow ourselves to be vulnerable to life's uncertainty. In this vulnerable openness, we may discover resources within ourselves that were previously hidden. There's a story of a Zen master who was known for his equanimity. A student asked him, "Master, how do you maintain such peace of mind?" The master replied, "When I eat, I eat. When I walk, I walk. When I sleep, I sleep." The student, confused, said, "But that's what everyone does. We all eat, walk, and sleep." The master smiled and said, "No, when most people eat, they're thinking about walking. When they walk, they're thinking about sleeping. When they sleep, they're thinking about eating. They're never fully present for their lives." This complete presence, this wholehearted engagement with the activity of the moment, is at the heart of Zen practice. It's not about achieving some special state, but about removing the veils that prevent us from experiencing the extraordinary richness of ordinary life. When we're fully present for the simple act of drinking a cup of tea, of listening to a friend, of feeling the breeze on our skin, we touch a dimension of being that is inherently peaceful and complete. Zen teachings often emphasize the importance of everyday activities as opportunities for practice. Chopping vegetables, sweeping the floor, washing dishes. These mundane tasks become vehicles for awakening when approached with full attention. There's a story of a monk who asked his teacher for instructions on the path to enlightenment. The teacher asked, "Have you eaten your rice porridge?" The monk replied, "Yes." The teacher said, "Then wash your bowl." This simple instruction contains the essence of Zen. The sacred isn't found apart from the ordinary, but within it. The practice of Zen doesn't promise to remove all difficulties from life. Pain, loss, and change are inevitable aspects of human existence. What Zen offers is a way to meet these realities without the additional suffering that comes from resistance. When we stop fighting against the nature of life, its impermanence, its unpredictability, its occasional harshness, we discover a freedom that doesn't depend on perfect conditions. Consider the difference between swimming against a strong current, exhausting yourself in the struggle, versus learning to flow with it, using its energy to navigate skillfully. Zen practice helps us recognize when we're swimming against the current of reality and offers tools for aligning ourselves more harmoniously with the way things are. One of the most profound teachings of Zen concerns our relationship with time. We often live as if happiness is somewhere in the future. When we achieve our goals, find the right partner, retire with enough money, or we live caught in the past, replaying old wounds, dwelling on regrets, or romanticizing the good old days. Zen points us back to the present moment, not as a spiritual platitude, but as a practical recognition that the present is the only place where life actually happens. This return to the present isn't achieved through force or will, but through the gentle yet persistent practice of noticing when the mind has wandered and bringing it back to current experience. Like training a puppy, we do this thousands of times with patience and kindness toward ourselves when we get lost in thought. Over time, we develop the capacity to rest more consistently in present awareness, neither pulled into the past nor pushed into the future. The Zen approach to suffering is particularly valuable in our modern world, where we're often taught that uncomfortable emotions are problems to be solved rather than experiences to be met with awareness. When sadness arises, we reach for distractions, food, entertainment, social media. When anxiety appears, we try to think our way out of it or numb it with substances. Zen offers a different path: to turn toward our suffering with kind attention, to give it space to be felt fully, and to recognize that it too is a passing phenomenon rather than a defining reality. This doesn't mean wallowing in pain or indulging in endless processing of difficult emotions. Rather, it means developing the capacity to be with our experience as it is, without needing to fix, change, or escape it. Paradoxically, it is often through this complete acceptance that transformation naturally occurs. A Zen student once came to his teacher in great distress, saying, "Master, I'm feeling so much anger lately. What should I do?" The teacher replied, "Show me this anger." The student, confused, said, "Well, I'm not angry right now, but it keeps coming up." The teacher smiled and said, "So it's not who you are, it's just something that visits occasionally. When it comes again, welcome it in for tea. Observe it closely. See what it has to teach you, and watch how, like all guests, it eventually leaves on its own." This teaching illustrates the Zen approach to difficult emotions, not to identify with them as who I am, but to recognize them as temporary visitors in the spaciousness of awareness. This shift in perspective from "I am angry" to "anger is arising and being experienced" creates a profound change in our relationship to emotional states. Zen practice also transforms our relationship to desire. Much of our suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are, wanting more pleasure, less pain, more recognition, less criticism. We live in a constant state of reaching for what isn't here and pushing away what is. This creates a background hum of dissatisfaction that colors our experience, even in relatively fortunate circumstances. The Buddha identified this restless wanting as the root of suffering, but the solution isn't to eliminate desire entirely. Rather, it's to see through the false promise that getting what we want will bring lasting happiness. When we observe closely, we notice that even when we get exactly what we desire, the satisfaction is often brief before a new wanting arises. This recognition doesn't make us passive or apathetic. It simply helps us hold our desires more lightly without being driven by them. There's a Zen story about a monk who was being chased by a tiger. He came to the edge of a cliff, saw a vine growing over the edge, and quickly climbed down it to escape. As he hung there, he saw another tiger waiting at the bottom of the cliff. To make matters worse, two mice, one white and one black, began gnawing at the vine. In this precarious position, the monk noticed a wild strawberry growing on the cliffside. He picked it, put it in his mouth, and exclaimed, "How sweet!" This story beautifully illustrates the Zen approach to life. Even in the midst of danger and uncertainty, symbolized by the tigers, even with the knowledge of our mortality, the mice representing day and night, gradually shortening our lives, we can fully taste the sweetness of the present moment. This isn't about ignoring reality, but about experiencing it completely, without the overlay of conceptual thinking that removes us from direct experience. The practice of Zazen develops our capacity for this direct experience. As we sit quietly, observing the breath and allowing thoughts to come and go without following them, we're training ourselves to be present for life as it is happening, not as we think about it. This quality of presence isn't limited to formal meditation, but gradually infuses all our activities, allowing us to live with greater fullness and appreciation. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck described this process as nothing special, not a pursuit of extraordinary states, but an intimate engagement with ordinary life. She wrote, "Our lives are always all right. There's nothing wrong with them. Even if we have horrendous problems, it's just our life." This radical acceptance doesn't mean resigned passivity, but a clear-eyed engagement with life that doesn't waste energy in resistance to what cannot be changed. This acceptance extends to ourselves as well. Many of us carry a harsh inner critic that constantly judges and finds us lacking. Zen practice helps us recognize this voice not as truth, but as conditioned thinking. As we develop the capacity to observe thoughts without automatically believing them, we create space for a more compassionate relationship with ourselves and others. A famous Zen saying tells us, "The obstacle is the path." This counterintuitive wisdom points to the fact that the very difficulties we try to avoid often contain our greatest opportunities for growth and awakening. When we stop seeing challenges as interruptions to our life and start recognizing them as our life, as the curriculum perfectly designed for our particular learning, our relationship to difficulty is transformed. Consider how a muscle grows stronger through the resistance of weights, or how a pearl forms around an irritating grain of sand. Similarly, our capacity for wisdom and compassion develops not despite life's difficulties, but because of them, if we learn to work with them skillfully rather than simply reacting to them habitually. This doesn't mean we seek out suffering or passively accept injustice. Zen has a long tradition of social engagement, with practitioners working actively to alleviate suffering in the world. The difference is in how this action arises, not from aggression or self-righteousness, but from a clear seeing of what is needed in each situation, a seeing unobstructed by rigid ideologies or personal agenda. The 13th century Zen master Dogen wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." This forgetting of self doesn't mean erasing our identity, but seeing through the illusion of a separate, independent self. When we recognize our fundamental interconnectedness with all of life, compassionate action flows naturally, not as something we force ourselves to do, but as the natural expression of our true nature. In Zen, this recognition isn't considered a special achievement reserved for spiritual virtuosos, but our birthright as human beings. Each of us has what's called Buddha nature, the inherent capacity for awakening to our true nature. This awakening isn't about becoming something we're not, but about recognizing what we've always been beneath the layers of conditioning and confusion. A Zen master was once asked, "What is Buddha?" He replied, 3 pounds of flax." This seemingly nonsensical answer points to the fact that Buddha nature isn't some mystical essence hidden within us, but the ordinary, everyday reality of our existence. It's not something to be attained in the future, but to be recognized right now, in the midst of our imperfect, messy human lives. This recognition doesn't happen once and for all, but occurs in moments, gradually becoming more stable and informing more of our life as we continue to practice. The Zen path is not about reaching a final destination, but about an ongoing process of awakening, of seeing more and more clearly the nature of reality and our place within it. This journey of awakening is not linear, but spirals back on itself, revisiting the same territories with deepened understanding. As the saying goes, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities may look the same from the outside, but they're experienced differently, with less struggle, greater presence, and a profound sense of connection to all of life. In our modern world of constant distraction and acceleration, the invitation of Zen to slow down and pay attention can feel both challenging and desperately needed. We've become accustomed to divided attention, checking our phones while in conversation, thinking about work while with family, planning tomorrow while barely tasting today's meal. This fragmented awareness leaves us feeling perpetually unsatisfied, always seeking the next thing without fully experiencing what's already here. Zen practice counteracts this tendency not by forcing the mind to concentrate, but by awakening interest in the present moment. When we truly pay attention to the sensation of breathing, to the play of light on water, to the subtle expressions on a loved one's face, we discover a richness in ordinary experience that we usually miss in our hurried lives. There's a story of a man on horseback who appears to be in a great hurry. A bystander calls out, "Where are you going in such a rush?" The rider replies, "I don't know. Ask the horse." This parable illustrates how many of us live, carried along by habits and reactivity, rarely pausing to question our direction or to make conscious choices about how we're living. Zen invites us to take the reins of attention back from the runaway horse of habit. Through practices like Zazen, we develop the capacity to notice when we've been carried away by thought and to return to present awareness. This doesn't happen through force or strain, but through the gentle yet persistent practice of noticing and returning thousands of times with patience and kindness toward ourselves when we get lost. This quality of attention isn't just about personal peace, but affects how we move through the world and interact with others. When we're fully present with another person, we offer them the rare gift of being truly seen and heard. When we're fully engaged in our work, whatever it might be, we bring care and excellence to our actions, rather than hurrying through them to get to something else. A Zen student asked his teacher, "Master, what is the most important thing?" The teacher replied, "Attention." The student, thinking he hadn't heard correctly, repeated his question. Again, the teacher said, "Attention." Somewhat irritated, the student asked, "I understand that attention is important, but what is the most important thing?" The teacher looked at him deeply and said, "Attention means attention." This teaching points to the centrality of awareness itself. It's not just a means to an end, a way to get somewhere else. The cultivation of present awareness is itself the heart of the path. As we become more fully present for our lives, we discover that what we've been seeking, peace, meaning, connection, isn't found elsewhere but in the quality of our attention to what's already here. This doesn't mean that life suddenly becomes easy or that difficulties disappear. Pain, loss, illness, and death remain realities of human existence. What changes through Zen practice is our relationship to these realities. Instead of adding layers of resistance, judgment, and narrative to our direct experience, we learn to meet it more simply and directly. Consider physical pain. When pain arises in the body, we typically react in one of two ways. Either we tense against it, trying to push it away, or we collapse into it, becoming identified with the suffering. Zen offers a middle way, to create space around the pain, to observe it with kind attention without either fighting or drowning in it. In this spacious awareness, we discover that pain itself is just sensation. It's our resistance and identification that transform it into suffering. The same principle applies to emotional pain. When grief, anger, or fear arise, our habitual reaction is to either suppress these feelings or to become completely identified with them. I am angry rather than anger is arising. Zen practice helps us recognize that emotions, like all phenomena, arise and pass away within the field of awareness. They're real but temporary, significant but not all-defining. This understanding doesn't make us cold or detached, but actually allows us to engage more fully with life's intensity. When we're not afraid of difficult emotions, when we know from experience that we can be with them without being overwhelmed, we become capable of greater intimacy, vulnerability, and authenticity in our relationships with ourselves and others. The 13th century Zen master Dogen wrote, "To carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening." This enigmatic statement points to a fundamental shift in perspective. From seeing ourselves as separate entities moving through the world, to recognizing that we are the world experiencing itself in a particular way. This shift isn't just philosophical, but has profound implications for how we live. When we recognize our fundamental interconnectedness with all of life, compassion flows naturally. It's not something we have to force or fake, but the natural response of a heart that doesn't see itself as separate from others' suffering. A Zen story tells of a young monk who was frustrated by feelings of anger that kept arising despite his sincere practice. He went to his teacher and asked, "I keep feeling anger. How can I overcome it?" The teacher asked, "Show me this anger." The monk replied, "I'm not angry right now. The anger comes and goes." The teacher smiled and said, "That's not your true nature then. If it were your true nature, it would be present all the time, like your nose or your eyes. These angry thoughts are just passing clouds in the sky of your mind. Don't identify with them and don't resist them. Just let them pass." This teaching points to what Zen calls our original face, the awareness that is present before thoughts and emotions arise, the consciousness that remains constant while experiences come and go. Through practice, we gradually learn to rest in this awareness rather than being carried away by every thought and feeling that crosses our inner landscape. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. In fact, when we're not exhausting ourselves in inner struggle and resistance, we have more energy available for effective action in the world. The bodhisattva ideal in Zen, of the awakened being who works tirelessly for the benefit of all, is not about martyrdom or self-sacrifice, but about the natural expression of wisdom and compassion once the illusion of separation has been seen through. In our daily lives, this might look like being more patient with a difficult family member because we see their behavior as coming from their own suffering rather than as a personal attack. It might manifest as having the courage to speak truth to power because we're less controlled by fear. It might appear as the capacity to stay present with a friend's grief without needing to fix or change it because we're comfortable with the full range of human emotion. The practice of Zen isn't about achieving some special state or having extraordinary experiences. It's about showing up fully for ordinary life, with its joys and sorrows, its beauty and pain. As Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck wrote, "Our practice is not to clear up the mystery, it is to make the mystery clear." This clarity doesn't come from figuring everything out intellectually, but from a direct perception that's available when the mind becomes still and present. It's like the difference between reading about water and actually drinking it, between studying a map and walking the terrain. Zen emphasizes direct experience over conceptual understanding, though both have their place. There's a famous Zen story about this distinction. A professor visited a Japanese master to inquire about Zen. The master served tea, pouring until the visitor's cup was full and then continuing to pour. The professor watched the overflow until he could no longer restrain himself. "It's full. No more will go in," he exclaimed. "Like this cup," the master replied. "You are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This teaching reminds us that sometimes our greatest obstacle to insight is what we think we already know. The practice of beginner's mind, approaching experience with openness and curiosity rather than preconceived ideas, creates space for fresh perception and direct understanding. In Zen, this understanding isn't considered something esoteric or separate from everyday life. The mundane activities of eating, walking, working, and relating become the very field of practice. As the saying goes, Zen is not some kind of excitement, but concentration on our usual everyday routine. This focus on the ordinary doesn't mean Zen is devoid of mystery or wonder. On the contrary, as we learn to be fully present for simple experiences, the taste of tea, the sound of rain, the sensation of breathing, we discover an extraordinary richness that was always available but overlooked in our habitual rushing and thinking. Zen practice also transforms our relationship to effort. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that trying harder is always the answer, that force of will can overcome any obstacle. Zen offers a different perspective, one that might be called effortless effort or non-doing. This doesn't mean passivity or laziness, but a quality of engagement that isn't driven by striving or dominated by the sense of a separate self making things happen. Consider the difference between trying to fall asleep and allowing sleep to happen, or between forcing a creative solution and allowing insight to arise. Some things cannot be achieved through direct effort, but require a different approach, creating the conditions and then letting go of control. In Zazen, we don't try to stop thinking or to achieve a particular state. We simply create the conditions, stable posture, present attention, and allow the natural settling of the mind to occur. As Zen master Shunryu Suzuki put it, Zen practice is to open up our small mind. This opening happens not through force, but through sustained, gentle attention. This principle applies beyond formal practice to all of life. Often our very effort to solve a problem keeps us locked in patterns that perpetuate it. When we step back, allow space, and approach the situation with beginner's mind, new possibilities emerge that weren't visible from within our habitual perspective. A Zen story illustrates this beautifully. A man was rowing his boat on a misty morning when suddenly another boat collided with his. He became furious and began shouting at the other boater. But as the mist cleared, he saw that the other boat was empty, simply drifting with the current. His anger immediately disappeared. This parable points to how much of our emotional reactivity comes from the attribution of intention to events. When we believe someone is deliberately causing us difficulty, we react with anger. When we recognize that most people are simply carried along by their own conditioning, like empty boats drifting with the current, compassion naturally arises. This doesn't mean we become passive in the face of harmful behavior. We can still set boundaries and work for positive change. But we do so without the added suffering of rage and resentment, without taking things so personally. This shift from reactivity to responsibility is one of the most valuable fruits of Zen practice. The Zen approach to difficulty is captured in a saying attributed to Shunryu Suzuki. The most important thing is to find out what is the most important thing. When we're caught up in the details of a challenging situation, we often lose sight of what really matters. Zen practice helps us step back and reconnect with our deeper values and purpose. This perspective doesn't eliminate problems, but puts them in a larger context. From the vantage point of the entire mountain range, the hill we're currently climbing doesn't seem so insurmountable. From the perspective of our whole life journey, today's crisis may appear as just one chapter in a longer story. There's a Zen story about a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbor said, "That's terrible luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing 3 wild horses with it. "How wonderful!" exclaimed the neighbor. "Maybe," responded the farmer. The following day, the farmer's son tried to ride one of the wild horses, fell off, and broke his leg. "What a tragedy," sympathized the neighbor. "Maybe," said the farmer. A week later, military officials came to the village to draft young men into the army, but the farmer's son was passed over because of his broken leg. "What good fortune," remarked the neighbor. "Maybe," said the farmer. This story illustrates the Zen perspective on the unpredictability of life and the limitations of our judgments about what is fortunate or unfortunate. Events that seem disastrous may later reveal unexpected benefits, while apparent good fortune may lead to unforeseen difficulties. By suspending our quick judgments about the ultimate meaning of events, we remain open to life's unfolding with greater equanimity. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. We still make choices, take action, and work to create positive conditions. But we do so without the rigid attachment to outcomes that creates suffering when things don't go according to plan. We learn to dance with life as it actually is, rather than struggling against the reality of constant change and unpredictability. The Zen approach to change is particularly valuable in times of transition and loss. When something we've relied on, a relationship, a job, our health, is taken away, our natural tendency is to resist and cling. Zen reminds us that everything is always changing, that nothing remains the same from moment to moment. What we think of as stable entities, including our own identity, are actually processes in constant flux. This truth is captured in the famous teaching of Heraclitus that no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. The river is continuously flowing, and we too are constantly changing. When we truly understand this at a deep level, not just intellectually but in our bones, our grip on life loosens. We still engage fully, love deeply, work wholeheartedly, but without the desperate clinging that creates so much suffering. A Zen monk was once asked, "What is the secret of your serenity?" He replied, "Wholehearted cooperation with the inevitable. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but clear seeing acceptance of what cannot be changed, coupled with wise action in areas where we can make a difference. The serenity prayer captures this wisdom. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. In Zen practice, this wisdom arises not through analysis, but through the development of clear perception, unobscured by our habitual patterns of thinking. As we learn to see reality more directly, without the overlay of our projections, assumptions, and desires, appropriate action arises naturally from that clear seeing. Consider how differently we might respond to a difficult situation when seeing it freshly versus reacting from old patterns. If someone speaks harshly to us, our habitual response might be immediate defensiveness or counterattack. But if we can pause, take a breath, and see the person before us, perhaps noticing their stress, fear, or pain, a very different response becomes possible. One that might de-escalate tension rather than increasing it. This capacity to respond freshly rather than react habitually is developed through Zazen practice. As we sit still, watching thoughts and emotions arise and pass away without following them, we create space between stimulus and response. This space is the ground of freedom, the possibility of choosing our response rather than being driven by conditioning. The Zen perspective also transforms our relationship to time. Much of our anxiety stems from dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. Zen points us back to the present moment, not as a spiritual platitude, but as the only place where life actually happens and where we have the power to act. Consider how much mental energy we expend on regretting past actions or anxiously anticipating future scenarios. This time traveling of the mind removes us from direct experience and creates suffering that exists only in thought. When we return to the simplicity of the present, the breath moving in the body, the sensations of walking, the taste of food, we discover a ground of being that is always available beneath the turbulence of thinking. This doesn't mean we never plan for the future or learn from the past. It means we do so from a place of present awareness rather than being lost in thought. The difference is palpable, like the difference between being caught in a dream and being awake within the dream, aware that you're dreaming. A Zen teaching illustrates this with the metaphor of the second arrow. The Buddha asked a student, "If a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful?" The student replied, "Yes, it is." The Buddha then asked, "If the person is struck by a second arrow, is that even more painful?" The student replied, "Yes, of course." The Buddha then explained, "In life, we cannot always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. This second arrow is optional." This teaching points to the difference between primary pain, the inevitable discomforts of life, from physical illness to loss and disappointment, and the secondary suffering we add through resistance, judgment, and narrative. The first arrow may be unavoidable, but the second is optional, dependent on how we meet experience. Through Zen practice, we develop the capacity to feel the first arrow without shooting ourselves with the second. We learn to be with pain without amplifying it through resistance, to face difficulty without adding the burden of, "This shouldn't be happening," or "I can't bear this." This doesn't eliminate life's challenges, but transforms our relationship to them, reducing unnecessary suffering and freeing energy for skillful response. This perspective is particularly valuable in times of loss and grief. When someone we love dies, when a relationship ends, when health fails, it's natural to feel pain. Zen doesn't ask us to suppress this pain or to transcend it prematurely. Rather, it invites us to be fully present with grief, to allow it to move through us without resistance, knowing that like all experiences, it will change over time. There's a Zen story about a woman whose only son died. In her grief, she carried the child's body to a Zen master and begged him to bring her son back to life. The master said he would need a special herb that could only be found in a house that had never known sorrow. He instructed her to go from house to house in the village asking for this herb. The woman went from door to door, but at each house she heard stories of loss and grief, a husband who had died, a child who was ill, parents who had passed away. Gradually, she realized that suffering was universal, that no home was untouched by loss. With this understanding, she returned to the master, ready to bury her son and continue her life with a new perspective on the universality of suffering and the preciousness of life. This story points to the way Zen helps us contextualize our personal suffering within the larger human experience. When we recognize that pain is not personal, but universal, not a sign that something has gone wrong, but an inherent aspect of being alive, we feel less isolated in our difficulties and more connected to the shared human journey. This connection is further developed through the cultivation of compassion, not as a lofty ideal, but as the natural response of a heart that recognizes our fundamental interconnectedness. When we truly understand that we are not separate from others, their suffering becomes our concern, not through moral imperative, but through direct perception of our shared being. There's a Zen story about two monks walking along a muddy road after heavy rain. They came upon a beautiful young woman unable to cross a large puddle without ruining her silk kimono. The elder monk picked her up and carried her across. The monks continued their journey in silence, but after several hours, the younger monk, unable to contain himself, said, "As monks, we are not supposed to touch women, especially beautiful ones. Why did you do that?" The elder monk replied, "I put the woman down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This story illustrates the Zen emphasis on mental freedom, the ability to respond appropriately to each situation without being bound by rigid rules or carrying unnecessary burdens. The younger monk was trapped in his ideas about what should have happened, while the elder monk simply did what was needed in the moment and then moved on without rumination. This mental freedom doesn't come from abandoning ethics, but from internalizing them so deeply that they inform our spontaneous responses rather than functioning as external constraints. As the Chinese Zen master Linji said, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." This shocking statement isn't advocating literal violence, but pointing to the importance of not turning even the highest spiritual teachings into idols that prevent direct perception and authentic response. The ultimate aim of Zen practice isn't to adhere perfectly to a set of principles, but to awaken to our true nature, what some traditions call Buddha nature or original face. This awakening isn't about becoming something other than what we are. but recognizing what has always been present beneath the layers of conditioning and confusion. A Zen teacher was asked, "What is Buddha?" He replied, "Your everyday mind is the way." This response points to the fact that enlightenment isn't found in some special state apart from ordinary life, but in the clear perception of what is already here. The extraordinary is found within the ordinary when we learn to see with fresh eyes. Zen teachings often speak of the concept of not knowing as a doorway to wisdom. This might seem counterintuitive in our culture that values expertise and certainty, but there's profound truth in embracing the limits of our understanding. When we release our grip on what we think we know, we open ourselves to perceiving reality more directly, without the filter of preconceptions. Consider how often our certainties have been proven wrong throughout our lives. Ideas we once held with absolute conviction may now seem misguided or incomplete. Scientific theories considered irrefutable have been replaced with deeper understandings. Cultural values have shifted dramatically across generations. Recognizing the provisional nature of knowledge creates a humility that allows for continued growth and learning. A famous Zen story illustrates this beautifully. A university professor came to visit a renowned Zen master to learn about Zen. As they sat together, the master began pouring tea into the professor's cup. He poured until the cup was full, and then continued pouring so that tea spilled over the rim and onto the table. The professor, watching the overflow, finally exclaimed, "The cup is full! No more will go in." The master stopped pouring and said, "Like this cup, your mind is full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This teaching points to the importance of approaching life with what Zen calls beginner's mind. A quality of openness and receptivity that isn't blocked by preconceptions. The beginner's mind doesn't mean erasing all knowledge, but holding it lightly, remaining open to new information and perspectives that might challenge or deepen our understanding. In our daily lives, this quality of not knowing can transform our relationships. How often do we believe we already know what someone will say before they finish speaking? How frequently do we categorize people based on limited information, missing the fullness of who they are? When we approach each person and situation with fresh attention, we create the possibility for genuine encounter rather than simply confirming our existing views. This beginner's mind applies equally to our relationship with ourselves. Many of us carry fixed ideas about who we are. I'm not creative. I'm bad with numbers. I always mess up relationships. These self-definitions limit what's possible and often become self-fulfilling prophecies. Zen practice invites us to question these fixed identities and to remain open to discovering new capacities and dimensions within ourselves. There's a story of a Zen student who complained to his teacher, "I've been practicing for years, but I still have so many difficult emotions. I still get angry, afraid, and confused. I thought meditation would bring me peace." The teacher replied, "The practice isn't about eliminating emotions, but about creating enough space that they don't define you. Can you feel anger without becoming an angry person? Can you experience fear without becoming a fearful person? That is the freedom the practice offers." This teaching points to a fundamental shift in our relationship to experience. Rather than identifying with every thought and emotion that arises, we learn to hold them in a more spacious awareness. This doesn't mean detachment or dissociation, but a quality of intimacy without fusion, feeling fully without being overwhelmed or defined by what we feel. The practice of Zazen develops this capacity by training us to observe the contents of consciousness without automatically engaging with every thought. As we sit quietly, watching the mind without following its movements, we begin to recognize that we are not our thoughts, but the awareness in which thoughts appear, like clouds passing through the sky. This recognition creates profound freedom. If I am not my anger, my anxiety, my self-doubt, if these are simply temporary phenomena moving through awareness, then I'm not bound by them. I can feel them fully without being controlled by them. I can respond to situations based on what's actually needed rather than being driven by habitual reactions. Zen teaches that this freedom is our birthright as human beings. It doesn't belong only to special individuals or require extraordinary capabilities. It's available to anyone willing to engage in the simple yet challenging practice of present awareness, of meeting life directly rather than through the veil of concepts and conditioning. This directness is reflected in Zen's emphasis on everyday activities as spiritual practice. Sweeping the floor, preparing a meal, washing dishes. These mundane tasks become vehicles for awakening when approached with full attention. There's a story of a monk who asked his master for instruction on the path to enlightenment. The master asked, "Have you eaten your rice porridge?" The monk replied, "Yes." The master said, "Then wash your bowl." This simple instruction contains the essence of Zen. The sacred isn't found apart from the ordinary, but within it. In our modern context, any activity can become a practice ground for presence. Washing the dishes, we can feel the warmth of the water, the texture of the plates, the movements of our hands. Walking to work, we can notice the sensation of our feet touching the ground, the play of light and shadow, the sounds of the environment. Even waiting in line, often a source of impatience and frustration, becomes an opportunity to practice presence, to notice the breath, to observe the mind's wanting to be elsewhere. This quality of presence transforms not only our inner experience, but our interactions with others. When we're fully present with another person, we offer them the rare gift of our complete attention. We listen not just to their words, but to the feelings and needs beneath them. We see them not through the filter of our projections and assumptions, but as they are in this moment. There's a Zen story about a master who was known for his compassion. A student asked him, "How can I develop greater compassion?" The master replied, "When you meet someone, imagine that they will be dead in 3 years." This startling instruction isn't meant to be morbid, but to cut through our habitual ways of relating and remind us of the preciousness of each encounter. When we remember that our time with each person is limited, we're more likely to be fully present, to speak what matters, to offer our genuine attention. This presence is particularly valuable in times of suffering, both our own and others. When we're in pain, our tendency is often to resist it, to try to escape through distraction or numbing. When others are suffering, we may try to fix their pain or offer platitudes that minimize it. Zen offers a different approach, to turn towards suffering with kind attention, to create space for the full experience without being overwhelmed by it. Consider the difference between being with someone who's trying to cheer you up when you're grieving versus being with someone who can simply sit with you in your pain, offering the gift of their presence without needing to change your experience. The second presence is profoundly healing, not because it makes the pain go away, but because it allows us to feel fully held in our humanity, including our suffering. This quality of presence extends to how we meet our own suffering. When difficult emotions arise, grief, anger, fear, can we turn toward them with the same kindness we would offer a friend in pain? Can we create space for these feelings without either suppressing them or being swept away by them? This is the heart of Zen practice, not to transcend the human condition, but to embrace it fully with all its joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain. A Zen teaching story tells of a woman whose son died. Overcome with grief, she went to the Buddha and begged him to bring her child back to life. The Buddha told her he could help her, but first she needed to bring him a mustard seed from a house that had never known death. The woman went from house to house in the village, but everywhere she went, she heard stories of loss. A husband who had died, a child who had passed away, parents who were gone. Gradually, she realized that suffering was universal, that no home was untouched by loss. With this understanding, she returned to the Buddha, ready to bury her son and continue her life with a new perspective on the universality of suffering and the preciousness of life. This story points to how Zen helps us contextualize our personal suffering within the larger human experience. When we recognize that pain is not personal but universal, not a sign that something has gone wrong but an inherent aspect of being alive, we feel less isolated in our difficulties and more connected to the shared human journey. This connection is further developed through the cultivation of compassion, not as a lofty ideal, but as the natural response of a heart that recognizes our fundamental interconnectedness. When we truly understand that we are not separate from others, their suffering becomes our concern, not through moral imperative, but through direct perception of our shared being. The Zen approach to compassion differs from conventional understandings in important ways. It's not based on pity or the sense that I have something to give to you who are lacking. Rather, it arises from the recognition that your suffering and mine are not separate. This subtle difference transforms compassionate action from something we do from a position of superiority to an authentic response to the reality of our interdependence. Consider how differently we might approach helping someone if we see them as other, an unfortunate person who needs our assistance, versus recognizing that their well-being and ours are inextricably linked. The first approach, though well-intentioned, maintains separation. The second dissolves the boundary between giver and receiver and allows for more authentic connection. This understanding of interconnectedness extends beyond human relationships to include all of life. Zen teaches that we are not separate from the natural world, but an integral part of it. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, these aren't resources external to us, but aspects of the vast web of life of which we are a part. A Zen master was once asked about the relationship between humans and nature. He replied, "There is no relationship because there are not two things to be related." This teaching points to the artificial nature of the boundary we draw between ourselves and the environment. When we truly understand this, care for the earth becomes not an obligation or a cause, but the natural expression of caring for ourselves. This perspective transforms our approach to environmental challenges. Instead of seeing climate change or species extinction as abstract problems happening elsewhere, we recognize that what happens to the earth happens to us. This isn't just poetic language, but biological reality. The air, water, and soil are not separate from our bodies, but continuously becoming part of us through breathing, drinking, and eating. The same understanding applies to social issues. In Zen, there's no fundamental separation between personal and social transformation. As we work to awaken to our true nature, we naturally become more responsive to suffering in all its forms, whether it manifests as personal distress or social injustice. There's a story of a Zen master who was known for his social activism. A student asked him, "Is your activism part of your Zen practice, or separate from it?" The master smiled and held up his hand. "Are my fingers part of my hand, or separate from it?" This teaching points to the integrated nature of personal and social awakening. They are not two separate paths, but aspects of the same journey. This integration is reflected in the Bodhisattva ideal that's central to Zen, the awakened being who works tirelessly for the benefit of all. The Bodhisattva doesn't postpone their own liberation until all beings are free, but recognizes that true liberation includes the understanding that I and other are not separate realities. As this understanding deepens, compassionate action flows naturally, not as something we force ourselves to do, but as the expression of our true nature. A famous Zen koan asks, "What is your original face before your parents were born?" This enigmatic question points to that which, in us, is beyond conditioning, beyond the constructed sense of self, beyond even birth and death. It invites us to recognize what in Buddhism is called Buddha nature, our inherent capacity for awakening, for wisdom and compassion that exists prior to all the layers of identity we accumulate. This teaching doesn't suggest that we erase our individuality or deny the uniqueness of our personal journey. Rather, it points to the ground of being that precedes and transcends our individual story, the awareness that remains constant while thoughts, emotions, and experiences come and go. In practical terms, this understanding helps us hold our personal identity more lightly. We can honor our particular gifts, acknowledge our specific challenges, and work with the unique conditions of our life without mistaking these for the totality of who we are. This loosening of identification creates freedom. The freedom to grow and change, to respond freshly to each situation, rather than being locked into fixed patterns based on who we think we are. A Zen master was once asked, "What is the most important thing?" He replied, "Attention." The student, thinking he hadn't heard correctly, repeated his question. Again, the master said, "Attention." Somewhat irritated, the student asked, "I understand that attention is important, but what is the most important thing?" The master looked at him deeply and said, "Attention means attention." This teaching points to the centrality of awareness itself. It's not just a means to an end, a way to get somewhere else. The cultivation of present awareness is itself the heart of the path. As we become more fully present for our lives, we discover that what we've been seeking, peace, meaning, connection, isn't found elsewhere, but in the quality of our attention to what's already here. This quality of attention isn't just about personal peace, but affects how we move through the world and interact with others. When we're fully present with another person, we offer them the rare gift of being truly seen and heard. When we're fully engaged in our work, whatever it might be, we bring care and excellence to our actions rather than hurrying through them to get to something else. In our modern world of constant distraction and acceleration, the invitation of Zen to slow down and pay attention can feel both challenging and desperately needed. We've become accustomed to divided attention, checking our phones while in conversation, thinking about work while with family, planning tomorrow while barely tasting today's meal. This fragmented awareness leaves us feeling perpetually unsatisfied, always seeking the next thing without fully experiencing what's already here. Zen practice counteracts this tendency, not by forcing the mind to concentrate, but by awakening interest in the present moment. When we truly pay attention to the sensation of breathing, to the play of light on water, to the subtle expressions on a loved one's face, we discover a richness in ordinary experience that we usually miss in our hurried lives. There's a story of a monk who spent years seeking enlightenment through intense practice. One day, exhausted and discouraged, he took a break and sat under a tree without any spiritual agenda. As he relaxed, he happened to notice a leaf falling slowly from a branch. Something about the simple beauty of this ordinary event triggered a profound shift in perception. In that moment, he realized that what he'd been seeking so strenuously had been present all along in the everyday world around him. This story illustrates that awakening isn't always the result of heroic effort, but can arise through a simple shift in perception, a dropping of the barriers we place between ourselves and direct experience. Sometimes, it's our very striving that prevents us from recognizing what's already here. This doesn't mean that practice is unnecessary. Regular meditation helps cultivate the conditions for insight by training the mind to be more stable and present. But the attitude we bring to practice matters greatly. If we approach it as a technique to get somewhere else, to become someone better, we may miss the opportunity to discover the peace and clarity that are already present beneath our seeking. A Zen saying captures this paradox. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities may look the same from the outside, but they're experienced differently, with less struggle, greater presence, and a profound sense of connection to all of life. This teaching points to the integration of spiritual insight and everyday life that's central to Zen. The goal isn't to transcend ordinary experience, but to penetrate it deeply, to discover the extraordinary within the ordinary. As the Japanese Zen master Dogen wrote, "If you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it?" This emphasis on the sacredness of everyday life is reflected in the Zen arts: calligraphy, flower arrangement, tea ceremony, gardening, archery. These practices aren't separate from spiritual training, but extensions of it, ways of bringing the same quality of presence and attention to specific activities that we cultivate in Zazen. Consider the Japanese tea ceremony, with its focus on simple movements performed with complete attention. Nothing in the ceremony is rushed or haphazard. Each gesture, wiping the tea scoop, folding the cloth, whisking the tea, is done with care and presence. The entire ritual becomes a meditation in action, a way of honoring the sacredness of the ordinary. This same quality can infuse any activity in our lives. Cooking a meal, we can be fully present with the colors, textures, and aromas. Cleaning the house, we can experience the satisfaction of caring for our space. Even routine tasks like brushing teeth or taking a shower can become opportunities for presence rather than moments to rush through on the way to something else. This quality of presence not only enriches our own experience but affects everyone around us. When we move through the world with attention and care, we create a field of awareness that others can sense and respond to. Just as anxiety and distraction are contagious, so too are presence and calm. Consider how differently you feel when talking to someone who's fully present with you versus someone who's distracted or mentally elsewhere. The quality of connection and understanding that's possible in the presence of real attention is profoundly different. By cultivating presence in our own lives, we offer this gift to everyone we encounter. This presence isn't something we achieve once and for all, but a continuous practice of returning. The mind naturally wanders. That's what minds do. The practice isn't to prevent wandering, but to notice when it happens and gently return to present awareness thousands of times with patience and kindness toward ourselves when we get lost. A Zen story illustrates this process. A student complained to his teacher, "My mind is always wandering during meditation. I'm a terrible meditator." The teacher replied, "The nature of the mind is to wander, just as the nature of a child is to run and play. We don't scold a child for running. We simply bring them back when they wander too far." Treat your mind with the same gentle firmness, bringing it back again and again without criticism. This teaching points to the importance of patience and self-compassion in Zen practice. The path isn't about perfection, but about continuous engagement, about returning to present awareness regardless of how many times we've wandered away. Each return is itself the practice, not a step towards some future state of permanent presence. This quality of patient returning applies not just to formal meditation, but to all of life. When we find ourselves caught in worry about the future, we return to the present. When we're trapped in regret about the past, we return to the present. When we're lost in judgments about ourselves or others, we return to the present. Each return is an opportunity to begin again, to meet life freshly without the burden of past failures or future anxieties. The Zen approach to difficulty is captured in a saying attributed to Shunryu Suzuki. The most important thing is to find out what is the most important thing. When we're caught up in the details of a challenging situation, we often lose sight of what really matters. Zen practice helps us step back and reconnect with our deeper values and purpose. This perspective doesn't eliminate problems, but puts them in a larger context. From the vantage point of the entire mountain range, the hill we're currently climbing doesn't seem so insurmountable. From the perspective of our whole life journey, today's crisis may appear as just one chapter in a longer story. There's a Zen story about this shift in perspective. A monk was being chased by a tiger and came to the edge of a cliff. Seeing a vine growing over the edge, he quickly climbed down it to escape. As he hung there, he saw another tiger waiting at the bottom of the cliff. To make matters worse, two mice, one white and one black, began gnawing at the vine. In this precarious position, the monk noticed a wild strawberry growing on the cliffside. He picked it, put it in his mouth, and exclaimed, "How sweet!" This story beautifully illustrates the Zen approach to life. Even in the midst of danger and uncertainty, symbolized by the tigers, even with the knowledge of our mortality, the mice representing day and night, gradually shortening our lives, we can fully taste the sweetness of the present moment. This isn't about ignoring reality, but about experiencing it completely, without the overlay of conceptual thinking that removes us from direct experience. In practical terms, this means that even in the midst of life's challenges, illness, loss, conflict, there remain moments of beauty, connection, and joy available to us if we're present enough to notice them. While part of our attention naturally goes to addressing problems, Zen reminds us not to become so fixated on difficulties that we miss the fullness of life that continues to unfold around and within us. This balance, being realistic about challenges while remaining open to the entirety of experience, is central to Zen wisdom. It helps us avoid both naive optimism that denies difficulty and pessimistic fixation that sees only problems. Instead, we develop the capacity to hold the whole of life, its pain and its beauty, its challenges and its gifts, in a spacious awareness that doesn't need to reject any part of reality. The Zen approach to change is particularly valuable in times of transition and loss. When something we've relied on, a relationship, a job, our health, is taken away, our natural tendency is to resist and cling. Zen reminds us that everything is always changing, that nothing remains the same from moment to moment. What we think of as stable entities, including our own identity, are actually processes in constant flux. This truth is captured in the teaching of impermanence, or anicca in Pali, one of the three marks of existence in Buddhism. Everything that comes into being eventually passes away. Relationships begin and end, careers rise and fall, bodies age and eventually die. Even mountains, which seem eternal from our perspective, are gradually wearing down through erosion or being built up through tectonic activity. Resisting this fundamental truth is a primary source of suffering. When we cling to how things were or how we want them to be rather than accepting how they actually are, we create inner tension and distress. It's like trying to hold back the tide, an exhausting and ultimately futile effort. A Zen story illustrates this understanding. A master was given a beautiful antique teacup made of the finest porcelain. He admired its craftsmanship, but would regularly use it for everyday tea drinking. A student, concerned about the risk to such a valuable object, asked why he didn't save it for special occasions. The master replied, "Every moment is a special occasion, and this cup is already broken." By already broken, he meant that the cup's eventual breaking was inherent in its existence. Recognizing this allowed him to enjoy it fully in the present, without the tension of trying to prevent the inevitable. This perspective doesn't mean we become careless or indifferent. We still take reasonable care of what's valuable to us. But we do so without the anxiety that comes from trying to freeze reality in place, to prevent the natural flow of change. When we accept impermanence as the nature of all things, we can love more deeply, enjoy more fully, and let go more gracefully when the time comes. This acceptance of change extends to our understanding of ourselves. Most of us carry a sense of being a fixed entity. This is who I am. These are my strengths and limitations. This is my personality. Zen challenges this fixed identity, pointing out that we too are in constant flux. The person we are today is not identical to who we were 10 years ago, or who we'll be 10 years from now. When we recognize this fluidity, we become more open to growth and transformation, less confined by our ideas about who we think we are. A student once asked a Zen master, "What is the self?" The master replied, "The self is like a river. If you scoop up a handful of water from a river and ask, 'Is this the river?' the answer is both yes and no. It is part of the river. But the river is much more than what you hold in your hand. And even what you hold is constantly changing, the molecules of water moving, evaporating. So too with the self. It is real yet fluid, identifiable yet constantly changing." This teaching points to what Buddhism calls the middle way, avoiding the extremes of both rigid identity, "I am definitely this," and nihilism, "There is no self at all." We have continuity and patterns that make us recognizable to ourselves and others, yet we are also in constant evolution, never quite the same from one moment to the next. Understanding this truth liberates us from the prison of fixed identity. We are not confined to being who we've been in the past. We can grow, change, develop new capacities, heal old wounds. Our nature is not set in stone, but is responsive to conditions, including the conditions we deliberately cultivate through practice. The Zen approach to difficulty is reflected in the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, which the Buddha presented in his first sermon after his awakening. The first truth acknowledges that suffering exists as part of the human condition. The second identifies the cause of suffering as craving and aversion, wanting things to be different than they are. The third offers the good news that liberation from suffering is possible. And the fourth outlines the path that leads to that liberation. This framework provides a practical approach to working with difficulty. Rather than denying pain or becoming overwhelmed by it, we acknowledge its presence. Rather than blaming others or circumstances for our distress, we look at how our own mental habits may be contributing to it. Rather than resigning ourselves to suffering as inevitable, we recognize the possibility of freedom. And rather than floundering without direction, we engage with practices that gradually transform our relationship to difficulty. In Zen, this path is not primarily conceptual, but experiential. Through Zazen practice, we develop the capacity to be with whatever arises without being carried away by it. We learn to observe thoughts and emotions without automatically believing or acting on them. We discover the space of awareness within which all experiences come and go, a space that remains unharmed even by painful experiences. This capacity to be with difficulty without being defined by it transforms our relationship to suffering. Pain may still arise. That's part of being human. But we add less suffering to it through resistance and identification. We learn to feel emotions fully without being controlled by them, to face challenges clearly without being overwhelmed by them. A Zen story illustrates this transformed relationship to difficulty. A senior monk and a junior monk were traveling together and came to a river with a strong current. As they prepared to cross, they saw a young woman waiting, unable to cross on her own. Despite monastic vows that forbade touching women, the senior monk carried her across the river and set her down on the other side. The two monks continued their journey in silence for several hours. Finally, the junior monk, unable to contain himself, said, "As monks, we are not supposed to touch women, especially beautiful ones. Why did you do that?" The senior monk replied, "I put the woman down hours ago." "Why are you still carrying her?" This story points to the mental freedom that Zen cultivates, the ability to respond appropriately to each situation without being bound by rigid rules or carrying unnecessary burdens. The younger monk was trapped in his ideas about what should have happened, while the elder monk simply did what was needed in the moment and then moved on without rumination. This freedom from mental entanglement allows for more skillful navigation of life's complexities. The Zen approach to emotions differs significantly from both suppression and indulgence. Rather than seeing emotions as problems to be eliminated or impulses to be automatically followed, Zen teaches us to create space around our feelings, to feel them fully while recognizing that they are temporary phenomena rather than defining truths. Consider the difference between saying, "I am angry," and "anger is arising." The first identification fuses us with the emotion, while the second creates a subtle but crucial space that allows us to respond rather than react. This doesn't diminish the intensity of the feeling, but changes our relationship to it. We can feel strong emotions without being controlled by them. A Zen teacher compared this relationship to emotions to hosting guests in your home. When a guest arrives, you welcome them in. You offer them tea, listen to what they have to say, but you don't allow them to move in permanently or to dictate how you live. Similarly, we can welcome emotional guests with awareness, neither pushing them away nor allowing them to take over our inner household. This welcoming stance toward all experience is captured in the Zen teaching of non-preference. While we naturally have preferences, we enjoy pleasure more than pain, success more than failure. Attachment to these preferences creates suffering when life inevitably brings what we don't want. By practicing equanimity, the capacity to be with whatever arises without excessive grasping or aversion, we develop inner freedom that doesn't depend on controlling external conditions. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. We still work to create positive conditions for ourselves and others. But we do so without the rigid attachment to outcomes that creates suffering when things don't go according to plan. We learn to dance with life as it actually is, rather than struggling against the reality of constant change and unpredictability. A Zen master was once asked, "What is the secret of your serenity?" He replied, "Wholehearted cooperation with the inevitable." This doesn't mean passive resignation, but clear-seeing acceptance of what cannot be changed, coupled with wise action in areas where we can make a difference. The Serenity Prayer captures this wisdom. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. In Zen practice, this wisdom arises not through analysis, but through the development of clear perception, unobscured by our habitual patterns of thinking. As we learn to see reality more directly, without the overlay of our projections, assumptions, and desires, Appropriate action arises naturally from that clear seeing. One of the most powerful teachings of Zen concerns our relationship with suffering. The Buddha taught that life inevitably includes dukkha, often translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. We experience physical pain, emotional distress, loss, illness, and eventually death. No human life is exempt from these realities. The question isn't whether we'll encounter suffering, but how we'll meet it when it arrives. The conventional approach is to try to eliminate suffering, to fix what hurts, to distract ourselves from pain, to arrange conditions so that discomfort doesn't arise. While there's wisdom in addressing problems that can be solved, much of life's suffering cannot be eliminated through external changes. People we love will still die. Bodies will still age and become ill. Disappointments and losses will still occur. Zen offers a different approach. Rather than trying to eliminate suffering, we learn to meet it with kind awareness. We develop the capacity to be with pain without adding the additional layer of suffering that comes from resistance. This doesn't mean we become passive in the face of injustice or problems that can be addressed. It means we stop fighting against the inherent vulnerability of being human. A famous Zen teaching illustrates this with the metaphor of the second arrow. The Buddha asked a student, "If a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful?" The student replied, "Yes, it is." The Buddha then asked, "If the person is struck by a second arrow, is that even more painful?" The student replied, "Yes, of course." The Buddha then explained, "In life we cannot always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. This second arrow is optional." This teaching points to the difference between primary pain, the inevitable discomforts of life, from physical illness to loss and disappointment, and the secondary suffering we add through resistance, judgment, and narrative. The first arrow may be unavoidable, but the second is optional, dependent on how we meet experience. Through Zen practice, we develop the capacity to feel the first arrow without shooting ourselves with a second. We learn to be with pain without amplifying it through resistance, to face difficulty without adding the burden of "this shouldn't be happening" or "I can't bear this." This doesn't eliminate life's challenges, but transforms our relationship to them, reducing unnecessary suffering and freeing energy for skillful response. This perspective is particularly valuable in times of loss and grief. When someone we love dies, when a relationship ends, when health fails, it's natural to feel pain. Zen doesn't ask us to suppress this pain or to transcend it prematurely. Rather, it invites us to be fully present with grief, to allow it to move through us without resistance, knowing that like all experiences, it will change over time. The practice of being present with suffering, rather than trying to escape it, develops a quality that Zen calls equanimity, the capacity to be with the full range of human experience without being thrown off balance. This doesn't mean emotional flatness or detachment, but rather a profound stability that can hold joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, success and failure, without being dominated by any of them. This equanimity is beautifully illustrated in the story of a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbor said, "That's terrible luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The next day the horse returned, bringing 3 wild horses with it. "How wonderful!" exclaimed the neighbor. "Maybe," responded the farmer. The following day, the farmer's son tried to ride one of the wild horses, fell off, and broke his leg. "What a tragedy," sympathized the neighbor. "Maybe," said the farmer. A week later, military officials came to the village to draft young men into the army, but the farmer's son was passed over because of his broken leg. "What good fortune," remarked the neighbor. "Maybe," said the farmer. This story points to the limitations of our judgments about what is fortunate or unfortunate. Events that seem disastrous may later reveal unexpected benefits, while apparent good fortune may lead to unforeseen difficulties. By suspending our quick judgments about the ultimate meaning of events, we remain open to life's unfolding with greater equanimity. This equanimity doesn't come from philosophical detachment, but from intimately contacting the changing nature of all experience. As we observe through practice how sensations, emotions, and thoughts continually arise and pass away, we develop less identification with any particular state. We recognize that pleasant experiences will inevitably end, while difficult ones will not last forever. This recognition allows us to be more fully present with whatever is happening without excessive grasping or aversion. The Zen perspective on time also offers profound liberation. Much of our suffering comes from dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, missing the life that's actually available to us in the present. While conventional time, measured by clocks and calendars, has its place in coordinating activities, Zen points to a different experience of time, what some teachers call being time. This being time isn't measured in hours and minutes, but in depth of presence. A single moment experienced with complete attention may contain more aliveness than years lived on autopilot. As we practice bringing our full awareness to each activity, whether meditation, conversation, work, or rest, we discover that the present isn't a thin slice between past and future, but a dimension of experience that has its own richness and fullness. This shift in our relationship to time transforms how we live. Rather than constantly rushing toward the next thing, perpetually feeling that happiness is somewhere else, we discover the satisfaction available in this very moment. This doesn't mean we stop planning for the future or learning from the past. It means we do so from a place of present awareness rather than being lost in thought. A Zen story illustrates this perspective. A man on horseback appears to be in a great hurry. A bystander calls out, "Where are you going in such a rush?" The rider replies, "I don't know. Ask the horse." This parable shows how many of us live, carried along by habits and momentum, rarely pausing to question our direction or to make conscious choices about how we're using our limited time on earth. Zen practice helps us take the reins back from the runaway horse of habit. Through developing present awareness, we become more intentional about how we live, more conscious in our choices, more able to align our actions with our deepest values, rather than being driven by conditioning and reactivity. This intentionality doesn't mean rigid control, but rather responsive alignment with life as it unfolds. Like a skilled sailor who works with the wind rather than against it, we learn to navigate with awareness, adjusting our course as conditions change while maintaining clarity about our fundamental direction. The journey of Zen is ultimately a journey home, a return to our true nature that has been present all along, but obscured by layers of conditioning, confusion, and habitual patterns of thinking. This homecoming isn't about becoming something different than what we are, but about recognizing what has always been here beneath the surface of our ordinary mind. In Zen teachings, this recognition is sometimes described as seeing one's original face before one's parents were born. This enigmatic phrase points to that in us, which precedes our personal history, our socialization, even our biological inheritance. The ground of being that is both intimately personal and vastly transcendent of our individual identity. This ground isn't something mystical or separate from everyday life, but the very awareness in which all experience arises. It's closer than our breath, more intimate than our thoughts, yet impossible to grasp with the conceptual mind. It can only be known directly through a radical shift in perspective that Zen practice helps cultivate. A Zen story illustrates this shift. A monk asked Master Huineng, the sixth patriarch of Zen, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West?" A traditional question about the essence of Zen. Huineng replied, "What is the meaning of asking about Bodhidharma?" This response points the questioner back to the awareness that is asking the question. The very consciousness that is seeking understanding is itself what is being sought. This recursive pointing is characteristic of Zen teaching, which aims not to provide new information, but to help us recognize what is already present yet overlooked. As one Zen saying puts it, it's like riding an ox in search of an ox. The very capacity for seeking is evidence that what we're looking for is already here. In our daily lives, we often miss this fundamental truth because our attention is habitually directed outward, toward objects and experiences, or inward, toward thoughts and emotions. We seldom notice the awareness itself in which all these phenomena appear. It's like looking so intently at the content of a movie that we forget the screen on which it's projected. Zen practice helps us recognize this screen of awareness, not as an abstract concept, but as our most immediate, moment-to-moment experience. In Zazen, as we sit quietly observing the rising and falling of breath, the coming and going of thoughts, we begin to notice that which is observing. This noticing isn't something we can grasp or control, but a natural recognition that arises when we stop identifying exclusively with the contents of consciousness. A Zen teacher compared this recognition to walking into a room where a television is playing an intense drama. If we're immediately absorbed in the story, we might experience strong emotions about the characters and their predicaments. But if we maintain awareness that this is just a show, we can still appreciate the drama without being completely taken over by it. Similarly, Zen practice helps us recognize that our thoughts and emotions are real, but not ultimately defining, like weather patterns moving through the sky of awareness. This recognition doesn't make us detached or dissociated, but, paradoxically, allows for greater intimacy with experience. When we're not identified with every thought and feeling that arises, we can be with experience more directly, without the overlay of self-referential thinking that creates separation. We discover that we are both the awareness and the experience within it, both the sky and the weather. This non-dual understanding is at the heart of Zen. It's expressed in the Heart Sutra's enigmatic teaching that form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form refers to the physical, tangible aspects of reality, our bodies, trees, mountains, clouds. Emptiness refers not to nothingness, but to the ungraspable, fluid nature of reality, its lack of fixed, independent existence. To say that form is emptiness means that nothing in the physical world exists as a separate, unchanging entity. To say that emptiness is form means that this flowing, ungraspable reality manifests as the very tangible world we experience. Consider a wave in the ocean. From one perspective, the wave appears as a distinct entity with its own characteristics. It has a certain height, shape, and movement. Yet from another perspective, the wave is inseparable from the ocean itself. It is made entirely of water, continuously changing, eventually merging back into the vastness from which it arose. So too with our experiences, our emotions, even our sense of self. They arise temporarily, have their moment, and pass away, all within the boundless field of awareness. This understanding transforms our relationship to suffering. When difficult emotions arise, anger, fear, grief, we can recognize them as waves in the ocean of our consciousness. We don't need to suppress them or be overwhelmed by them. We can allow them to move through us with awareness, knowing they are temporary manifestations rather than defining truths about who we are. A famous Zen story illustrates this perspective. A monk came to his teacher deeply troubled by persistent feelings of anger that seemed incompatible with his spiritual path. "Master," he said, "I keep feeling angry despite all my practice. What should I do?" The teacher replied, "Show me this anger." The monk said, "I'm not angry right now, but it keeps arising." The teacher smiled and said, "Ah, so it's not you. It visits sometimes, but it's not who you are. When it comes again, look at it closely. Examine its nature. See where it comes from and where it goes. Don't fight it or follow it. Just watch it with kind attention and you'll discover its true nature." This teaching points to a profound shift in how we relate to our inner experience. Instead of identifying with emotions as who I am or rejecting them as unwanted intruders, we learn to observe them with curiosity and compassion, recognizing them as temporary visitors in the guest house of consciousness. The 13th century Persian poet Rumi captured this attitude beautifully in his poem The Guest House. "This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." This welcoming stance toward all experience is at the heart of Zen practice. It doesn't mean passively accepting harmful situations or indulging destructive impulses. Rather, it means meeting each experience with an open awareness that allows us to respond skillfully rather than react habitually. Consider how differently we might handle anger when recognized as a temporary visitor rather than a defining identity. Instead of saying, "I am angry," identification, or "I shouldn't be angry," rejection, we might notice anger is arising, observation. This subtle shift creates space for choice. We can feel the bodily sensations of anger, the heat, the tension, the energy, without automatically acting from that state or judging ourselves for experiencing it. This capacity to be with experience without being defined by it is developed through regular meditation practice. As we sit quietly, observing the breath and allowing thoughts and emotions to come and go without following them, we're training ourselves in a new relationship to experience, one based on spacious awareness rather than automatic identification or rejection. This training gradually extends beyond formal practice into everyday life. We begin to notice the space between stimulus and response, the moment of choice before we react. We develop the capacity to ask, what's needed here, rather than being driven by habitual patterns. We discover that freedom isn't found in controlling circumstances, but in how we meet whatever arises. A Zen teaching story illustrates this freedom. Two monks were traveling together when they came to a river. A beautiful young woman was standing on the bank, unable to cross on her own. Though monks were forbidden to touch women, the older monk carried her across the river and set her down on the other side. The monks continued their journey in silence for several hours. Finally, the younger monk, unable to contain himself, said, "How could you carry that woman?" "We're not supposed to touch women," the older monk replied. "I put her down on the riverbank." "Are you still carrying her?" This story points to the freedom that comes from responding appropriately to each situation without being bound by rigid rules or continuing to carry unnecessary mental burdens. The younger monk was trapped in his ideas about what should have happened, while the elder monk simply did what was needed in the moment and then moved on without rumination. This mental freedom doesn't come from abandoning ethics, but from internalizing them so deeply that they inform our spontaneous responses rather than functioning as external constraints. As the Chinese Zen master Linji said, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." This shocking statement isn't advocating literal violence, but pointing to the importance of not turning even the highest spiritual teachings into idols that prevent direct perception and authentic response. The ultimate aim of Zen practice isn't to adhere perfectly to a set of principles, but to awaken to our true nature, what some traditions call Buddha nature or original face. This awakening isn't about becoming something other than what we are, but recognizing what has always been present beneath the layers of conditioning and confusion. This recognition doesn't happen once and for all, but occurs in moments, gradually becoming more stable and informing more of our life as we continue to practice. The Zen path is not about reaching a final destination, but about an ongoing process of awakening, of seeing more and more clearly the nature of reality and our place within it. In our modern context, where many spiritual seekers are not monastics, but lay people balancing practice with work, family, and social responsibilities, Zen offers particular wisdom. It doesn't ask us to renounce the world, but to engage with it more fully and clearly. It doesn't set spiritual life apart from ordinary life, but reveals the sacred dimension of everyday activities. Consider how this perspective might transform our relationship to work. Rather than seeing it as just a means to earn money or achieve status, we might approach each task as an opportunity for full engagement and expression of care. Whether cooking a meal, writing a report, caring for a child, or cleaning a space, we can bring the same quality of presence that we cultivate in formal meditation. There's a story of a Zen master who was known for his extraordinary presence and peace. When asked about his spiritual practice, he replied, "When I eat, I eat. When I walk, I walk. When I sleep, I sleep." The questioner responded, "But that's what everyone does." The master smiled and said, "No, most people eat while thinking about work, work while thinking about recreation, and go to bed thinking about everything they didn't get done. They're never fully present for their lives." This complete presence, this wholehearted engagement with the activity of the moment, is at the heart of Zen practice. It's not about achieving some special state, but about removing the veils that prevent us from experiencing the extraordinary richness of ordinary life. When we're fully present for the simple act of drinking a cup of tea, of listening to a friend, of feeling the breeze on our skin, we touch a dimension of being that is inherently peaceful and complete. This quality of presence also transforms our relationships. So much of our interaction with others is filtered through our projections, assumptions, and preoccupations. We often don't truly see the person before us, but our idea of who they are. Zen practice helps us set aside these mental constructs and meet each person freshly, with genuine curiosity and openness. A Zen teaching on this topic advises, when you listen to someone, listen as if they are revealing the secrets of the universe to you. This attitude of complete attention is one of the greatest gifts we can offer another person. The experience of being truly seen and heard without judgment or agenda. This quality of listening extends to ourselves as well. Many of us carry a harsh inner critic that constantly judges and finds us lacking. Zen practice helps us recognize this voice, not as truth, but as conditioned thinking. As we develop the capacity to observe thoughts without automatically believing them, we create space for a more compassionate relationship with ourselves. This self-compassion isn't about indulgence or lowering standards, but about relating to ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we would offer a good friend. It recognizes our shared humanity, including our inevitable mistakes and imperfections, without using them as grounds for self-condemnation. The Zen perspective on effort is particularly valuable in our culture of striving and achievement. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that trying harder is always the answer, that force of will can overcome any obstacle. Zen offers a different perspective, what might be called effortless effort or non-doing. This doesn't mean passivity or laziness, but a quality of engagement that isn't driven by striving or dominated by the sense of a separate self making things happen. Consider the difference between trying to fall asleep and allowing sleep to happen, or between forcing a creative solution and allowing insight to arise. Some things cannot be achieved through direct effort, but require a different approach, creating the conditions and then letting go of control. This principle applies to many aspects of life. Often, our very effort to solve a problem keeps us locked in patterns that perpetuate it. When we step back, allow space, and approach the situation with beginner's mind, new possibilities emerge that weren't visible from within our habitual perspective. A famous Zen story illustrates this approach. A man noticed a butterfly struggling to emerge from its cocoon. Wanting to help, he gently cut open the cocoon to free the butterfly. To his dismay, the butterfly's wings were shriveled and undeveloped, and it was unable to fly. What he didn't realize was that the struggle to emerge from the cocoon was nature's way of forcing fluid into the butterfly's wings, preparing them for flight. By helping, he had actually prevented the butterfly from developing the strength it needed. This story points to the wisdom of allowing natural processes to unfold in their own time, without premature intervention. Sometimes the struggle itself is essential for growth and development. This doesn't mean we never offer help, but that we discern when assistance is truly supportive versus when it might prevent necessary development. The Zen approach to difficulty is particularly valuable in times of significant change or uncertainty. When familiar structures fall away, a relationship ends, a job is lost, health declines, we naturally want to grasp for security and control. Zen invites us instead to remain open to not knowing, to allow ourselves to be vulnerable to life's uncertainty. In this vulnerable openness, we may discover resources within ourselves that were previously hidden. A Zen master was asked by a student, "How can I find peace in a world of such chaos and uncertainty?" The master replied, "You are seeking the wrong thing. Do not look for certainty in an uncertain world. Instead, develop the capacity to be at peace with uncertainty. This is true freedom." This teaching doesn't dismiss the very human desire for security, but points to a deeper security that isn't dependent on controlling external conditions. When we recognize the stable awareness that remains present through all changing experiences, we discover a ground of being that provides continuity and presence regardless of external circumstances. This understanding is particularly relevant in our modern world, where change is accelerating and traditional sources of stability, long-term employment, geographical roots, stable social structures, are increasingly rare. The capacity to remain centered amidst change, to navigate uncertainty with clarity rather than fear, becomes an essential life skill. The Zen perspective on death offers profound wisdom for confronting our mortality. In many cultures, death is a taboo subject, something to be avoided or denied. This avoidance creates an undercurrent of anxiety that affects how we live. Zen takes a different approach, encouraging direct contemplation of death, not as a morbid fixation, but as a way to clarify what truly matters and to appreciate the preciousness of life. A Zen story tells of a wealthy man who spent his life accumulating possessions and status while neglecting his family and his own well-being. When he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, he realized that none of his achievements could accompany him beyond death. In his final months, he discovered what truly mattered: the love of his family, the beauty of the natural world, the peace of a quiet mind. Though his time was short, he found greater fulfillment in those months than in decades of chasing external success. This story points to how the recognition of our mortality can clarify our priorities and free us from trivial concerns. When we remember that our time is limited, we're less likely to waste it on resentment, pointless conflict, or pursuits that don't align with our deepest values. Zen monasteries traditionally include regular contemplation of death as part of training. This isn't to create fear or despair, but to penetrate the illusion of permanence that keeps us living superficially. As one Zen saying puts it, "Die before you die, and be completely free." This enigmatic instruction points to the freedom that comes from letting go of our attachment to a fixed self-image before our physical death, releasing the limiting identities we've constructed, and discovering the boundless awareness that remains. This contemplation of death also heightens our appreciation for the gift of life. When we truly understand that each day is not guaranteed, that each encounter with a loved one could be our last, ordinary moments take on extraordinary significance. A meal shared with family, a conversation with a friend, even the simple experience of breathing and moving become occasions for gratitude and wonder. The Zen approach to aging is similarly transformative. In a culture obsessed with youth and physical perfection, aging is often seen as a decline to be resisted through cosmetic interventions and anti-aging remedies. Zen offers a different perspective, seeing the later stages of life as an opportunity for deepening wisdom and simplicity. There's a Zen story about an old master who was asked by a student, "What is the secret of your contentment in old age?" The master replied, "When I was young, I tried to grasp everything I desired and push away what I didn't want. Now I've learned to let life come to me and pass through me. I take what I need and release the rest. My body may have weakened, but my spirit has grown lighter." This teaching points to the inner freedom that can develop as we age, particularly if we've engaged in spiritual practice. While the body naturally changes over time, our awareness can become clearer and more spacious. Physical limitations may actually support spiritual growth by necessitating a shift from external activities to inner cultivation. This perspective doesn't romanticize the challenges of aging or deny the real losses that may accompany it. Rather, it suggests that even these difficulties can become part of the path of awakening if met with awareness and acceptance. The limitations of the aging body can teach us to identify less with physical form and to recognize more fully the awareness that remains unchanged throughout the life cycle. The Zen approach to pleasure and pain offers wisdom for navigating the full spectrum of human experience. Rather than seeking to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, the default strategy of the untrained mind, Zen teaches us to be present with both pleasant and unpleasant experiences without excessive attachment or aversion. This doesn't mean denying the natural preference for pleasure over pain, but recognizing that chasing after pleasant experiences and running from unpleasant ones creates its own suffering. The constant attempt to control our experience keeps us in a state of tension and prevents us from being fully present with life as it is. A Zen story illustrates this understanding. A student complained to his teacher, "I keep searching for happiness, but it seems so elusive. What am I doing wrong?" The teacher replied, "You're treating happiness as a destination, something to find and hold on to. But happiness is not a place to reach. It's the freedom that comes from not needing things to be different than they are." This teaching points to a happiness that isn't dependent on getting what we want, but arises from a profound acceptance of life as it is. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but a clear-eyed engagement that doesn't waste energy in resistance to what cannot be changed. Consider how much suffering comes not from pain itself, but from our resistance to it. This shouldn't be happening, that we add to difficult experiences. When we practice accepting pain as part of life rather than an aberration or failure, we reduce the additional layer of suffering that comes from fighting reality. Similarly, Much of our dissatisfaction comes from the inability to fully enjoy pleasant experiences because of the anxious awareness that they won't last. When we grasp at pleasure, trying to make it permanent or more intense, we paradoxically diminish our capacity to enjoy it. The Zen approach is to savor pleasant experiences fully while they're happening, without clinging to them when they pass. This balanced relationship to pleasure and pain is developed through meditation practice. As we sit quietly, observing sensations arise and pass away without following them, we train in non-attachment, the capacity to be with experience without being defined by it or driven by it. This non-attachment isn't coldness or indifference, but a warm, engaged presence that doesn't need to control experience. The Zen perspective on desire offers particular wisdom for our consumer culture, where we're constantly stimulated to want more possessions, more status, more experiences, more pleasure. This endless wanting creates a background dissatisfaction, even in relatively fortunate circumstances. No matter how much we acquire or achieve, there's always something more to desire. Zen doesn't ask us to eliminate desire, an impossible and unnecessary goal, but to see through the false promise that getting what we want will bring lasting happiness. When we observe closely, we notice that even when we get exactly what we desire, the satisfaction is often brief before a new wanting arises. This recognition helps us hold desires more lightly, without being driven by them. A Zen teacher compared desire to thirst. If you're dehydrated, water is genuinely needed and will relieve your thirst temporarily. But if you have a disease that creates constant thirst, no matter how much you drink, the solution isn't more water, but addressing the underlying condition. Similarly, if our desires arise from a sense of inner lack or emptiness, no amount of external acquisition will fill that space. The path isn't to fulfill every desire, but to investigate its source. This investigation often reveals that beneath specific desires is a more fundamental longing for connection, meaning, peace, or love. When we recognize these deeper needs, we can address them more directly, rather than through substitute satisfactions that never quite fulfill. The Zen approach to conflict offers valuable guidance for navigating disagreements and tensions, whether internal or interpersonal, rather than seeing conflict as something to avoid at all costs or as a battle to be won. Zen invites us to view it as an opportunity for deeper understanding and growth. Internal conflict, the clash between different aspects of ourselves, different values or desires, is often met with suppression of one side, or a painful oscillation between opposing positions. Zen suggests a different approach, creating space to hold both sides with awareness, listening deeply to each without immediate resolution. This spacious attention often allows a third way to emerge, not a compromise between positions, but a more integrated understanding that transcends the apparent opposition. A similar approach applies to interpersonal conflict. Instead of defending our position or trying to defeat the others, we can practice deep listening, attending not just to the words, but to the needs and values beneath them. We can recognize that conflict often arises from misunderstanding or from legitimate differences in perspective, rather than from bad intentions. A Zen story illustrates this approach. Two monks were arguing about the temple flag flapping in the wind. One said, "The flag moves." The other said, "The the wind moves. They argued back and forth but couldn't agree. Their teacher happened to pass by and said, "Neither the flag nor the wind moves. It is your mind that moves." This teaching points to how our perceptions and thinking create the reality we experience, including conflicts that seem to exist out there, but actually arise in the mind. This doesn't mean that all conflicts are merely perceptual or that real differences don't exist. It points to the importance of recognizing how our interpretations, assumptions, and reactions shape conflict situations. By becoming aware of our own contribution, we create the possibility for genuine dialogue rather than entrenched opposition. The practice of Zen helps us develop the capacity to stay present in difficult conversations without being hijacked by defensive reactions or the need to be right. We learn to notice when we're becoming tense or angry and to reconnect with our breath and body rather than being carried away by emotional reactivity. This creates space for more skillful response. In all these areas, from our relationship to thoughts and emotions to how we handle conflict, from our understanding of desire to our approach to aging and death, Zen offers practices that transform our experience not by changing external conditions, but by shifting how we relate to them. This inside-out approach is captured in a saying attributed to the Buddha, "With our thoughts, we make the world." This recognition of the power of perception and attitude doesn't mean that external circumstances don't matter or that structural changes aren't necessary. It points to the freedom we have, regardless of conditions, to relate to life with greater wisdom and compassion. Even in difficult circumstances, we can cultivate inner freedom through how we meet experience. The journey of Zen is not about reaching a final destination, but about an ongoing process of awakening, of seeing more clearly, of responding to life with greater freedom and compassion. It doesn't promise a life without difficulties, but offers practices that transform our relationship to difficulty, allowing us to meet life's inevitable challenges with greater ease and clarity. As we walk this path, we discover that what we've been seeking, peace, meaning, connection, isn't found elsewhere, but in the quality of our attention to what's already here. The extraordinary is revealed within the ordinary when we learn to see with fresh eyes and to meet life directly, without the veil of habitual thinking. In this direct meeting, we find the freedom and peace that have been our birthright all along. You're welcome. Let me continue with the rest of the final 7,000 words to complete the script. The Zen approach to the natural world offers profound wisdom for our ecological crisis. While much environmental discourse focuses on technical solutions or policy changes, both necessary aspects of addressing climate change and biodiversity loss, Zen points to something deeper: our fundamental relationship with the more than human world. In the modern industrial worldview, nature is often seen as a resource to be used, as something separate from human life and society. Zen challenges this perception of separation, pointing to our inescapable embeddedness in the web of life. We are not observers or managers of nature, but participants within it, as inseparable from the living world as waves are from the ocean. A Zen teacher expressed this understanding when asked about humans' relationship to nature. He replied, "There is no relationship because there are not two things to be related." This teaching points to the artificial nature of the boundary we draw between ourselves and the environment. When we truly understand this, care for the earth becomes not an obligation or a cause, but the natural expression of caring for ourselves. This perspective transforms our approach to environmental challenges. Instead of seeing climate change or species extinction as abstract problems happening elsewhere, we recognize that what happens to the earth happens to us. This isn't just poetic language, but biological reality. The air, water, and soil are not separate from our bodies, but continuously becoming part of us through breathing, drinking, and eating. The Zen tradition has long expressed this intimate connection with the natural world. Many Zen teachers have been poets whose work celebrates the wisdom revealed in mountains, rivers, birds, and trees. The Japanese haiku tradition, deeply influenced by Zen, focuses attention on the small details of nature that reveal the vast mystery of existence. A frog jumping into an old pond, autumn leaves falling, the first winter snow. This attention to nature isn't romantic escapism, but a way of reconnecting with the reality of our existence as embodied beings living within, not apart from, the natural world. By developing intimacy with the more than human world, noticing the birds in our neighborhood, the patterns of weather, the plants growing in cracks in the sidewalk, we remember our participation in something larger than our human concerns. This remembering doesn't require special circumstances or pristine wilderness, though such experiences can be powerful. It's available wherever we are, in city parks and suburban backyards, as well as remote forests. It comes not from the setting, but from the quality of attention we bring to our surroundings. Consider how differently we might experience a walk through a local park if we're lost in thought about work problems, versus if we're fully present, noticing the texture of tree bark, the songs of birds, the feeling of air on skin. The same physical environment becomes a completely different experience depending on the quality of our attention. This quality of attention is developed through practices like Zazen, where we learn to be present with our immediate experience rather than lost in thought. As this capacity for presence deepens, we naturally become more attuned to the living world around us. We notice more, appreciate more, and feel our connection more directly. This sense of connection fosters what Zen teacher and environmentalist Joanna Macy calls active hope. Not optimism based on likelihood of success, but commitment arising from love for the world. When we feel ourselves as part of the living earth, rather than separate from it, we're naturally moved to act on its behalf, not from guilt or obligation, but from the same impulse that protects one's own body from harm. The Zen perspective on technology offers valuable guidance for navigating our increasingly digital world. While Zen doesn't reject technology, many Zen centers use websites, social media, and video platforms to share teachings. It encourages us to use these tools mindfully rather than being used by them. In our hyper-connected age, many of us experience what researchers call continuous partial attention, a state of being perpetually distracted by notifications, updates, and the lure of endless information. This fragmented awareness leaves us feeling scattered and exhausted, unable to be fully present with anything or anyone. Zen practice counteracts this tendency by developing the capacity for sustained attention. Through meditation, we train ourselves to stay with a single focus, the breath, bodily sensations, environmental sounds, rather than following every thought or impulse that arises. This training becomes increasingly valuable in a world designed to capture and monetize our attention. A Zen approach to technology might include practices like designated device-free times, mindful use of social media, and regular digital fasts. It's not about rejecting the benefits of technology, but about using it intentionally rather than compulsively, in ways that enhance rather than diminish our humanity. This intentionality extends to how we consume information. In an age of information overload, Zen reminds us that wisdom doesn't come from accumulating more data, but from digesting and integrating what we encounter. Sometimes less input and more reflection leads to greater understanding than constant consumption of new content. The Zen perspective on work offers valuable guidance for finding meaning and balance in our professional lives. In the traditional monastery, work, samu, was considered an integral part of spiritual practice, not separate from meditation. Cooking, cleaning, gardening, and maintaining the monastery were all approached with the same attention and presence cultivated in formal meditation. This integration of work and practice challenges the common modern separation between spiritual life and work life. Rather than seeking meaning exclusively in designated spiritual activities, Zen invites us to bring the same qualities of presence, care, and non-attachment to our daily work. This doesn't mean that all jobs are equally conducive to practice, or that we shouldn't seek work aligned with our values. It suggests that whatever our current work situation, we can approach it as a field of practice, an opportunity to cultivate attention, patience, and compassion. Consider how differently we might experience even routine tasks, answering emails, attending meetings, completing reports, if approached with full attention rather than resistance or boredom. The quality of our experience isn't determined solely by the nature of the activity, but by how we engage with it. A Zen story illustrates this perspective. A young monk complained to his teacher about the tedium of daily chores in the monastery. "When will I have time for real practice?" he asked. The teacher replied, "Tell me, when you're sweeping the courtyard, what do you think about?" The student admitted, "I'm usually thinking about finishing quickly so I can meditate." The teacher said, "That's your mistake. When sweeping, just sweep. Give yourself completely to each activity, and you'll discover that life doesn't divide into practice and non-practice. It's all your path." This teaching doesn't glorify mundane work or suggest we should passively accept exploitative conditions. It points to the possibility of finding meaning and presence in whatever work we're doing, while also working for more just and humane economic structures. The Zen approach to health and illness offers wisdom for navigating the vulnerabilities of embodied existence. In a culture that often treats illness as failure and death as the ultimate defeat, Zen reminds us that sickness, aging, and death are natural aspects of being human, not aberrations or punishments. This perspective doesn't diminish the importance of medical care or health-promoting practices. It suggests that even as we take reasonable measures to maintain well-being, we can accept the fundamental vulnerability of the body without added layers of fear, shame, or resistance. A Zen teacher who was diagnosed with a serious illness was asked by a student, "How do you maintain such peace despite your condition?" The teacher replied, "I don't fight against reality. This body is getting sick. That's what bodies sometimes do. But I am more than this body, and so are you. The nature of awareness remains clear even when the body is compromised. This teaching points to the distinction between primary pain, the physical sensations of illness or injury, and the secondary suffering we add through resistance, fear, and narrative. While we may not be able to eliminate physical pain, we can reduce unnecessary suffering by meeting our experience with acceptance rather than struggle. This acceptance isn't passive resignation, but clear-seeing engagement with reality as it is. We still seek appropriate treatment and support. We still express our preferences for health over illness. But we do so without the additional burden of "this shouldn't be happening" or "why me?" Responses that add mental anguish to physical discomfort. The practice of Zazen develops the capacity to be with physical discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. As we sit still, noticing bodily sensations without immediately reacting to them, we discover that we can be with pain without being defined by it. This capacity serves us not only in meditation, but in navigating the inevitable physical challenges that arise throughout life. This perspective is particularly valuable in chronic illness or conditions that don't respond to treatment. When complete healing isn't possible, the capacity to accept limitation without being crushed by it becomes essential. Many who live with chronic conditions report that mindfulness practices help them maintain quality of life and meaning even with ongoing physical challenges. The Zen approach to pleasure is equally transformative. Rather than endless pursuit of more intense or frequent pleasant experiences, the hedonic treadmill that leaves many feeling perpetually unsatisfied, Zen teaches us to fully savor simple pleasures without grasping. Consider the Japanese tea ceremony, a practice deeply influenced by Zen. Every aspect of the ceremony, the preparation of the space, the heating of the water, the whisking of the tea, is performed with complete attention. This focus allows participants to appreciate subtle pleasures that might be overlooked in a more hurried approach. The sound of water being poured, the texture of the ceramic cup, the complex flavors of the tea itself. This capacity to appreciate simple pleasures is available in everyday life, not just in formal ceremonies. The taste of a ripe peach, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the sound of rain on a roof. These ordinary experiences become extraordinary when met with full attention. Many people report that meditation practice enhances their sensory awareness, allowing them to enjoy simple pleasures more deeply. This enjoyment doesn't come from grasping or trying to intensify experience, but from the capacity to be fully present with what is. As one Zen saying puts it, when hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. This seemingly simple instruction points to the direct, unmediated experience of life's basic pleasures, without the overlay of conceptual thinking that often diminishes direct experience. The Zen perspective on community offers valuable guidance for navigating our relationships and social connections. In the Buddhist tradition, the Sangha, the community of practitioners, is considered one of the three jewels or refugees, along with the Buddha, awakened awareness, and the Dharma, the teachings and practices that lead to awakening. This emphasis on community recognizes that spiritual development doesn't happen in isolation, but through interaction, feedback, and mutual support. The Sangha provides both practical assistance and the mirror of relationship in which we can see ourselves more clearly. In traditional Zen monasteries, the daily schedule includes extensive time in group meditation, shared meals, and communal work. This immersion in community creates both challenges and opportunities for practice. The minor frictions of communal living, differences in preference, personality clashes, competing needs, become opportunities to observe our reactions and to practice patience, communication, and consideration. In our modern context, formal Zen communities still exist in the form of monasteries, residential centers, and local meditation groups. But the principles of Sangha can inform all our relationships, helping us approach connections with greater presence, care, and authenticity. A core Zen teaching relevant to community is the recognition of interdependence. Nothing and no one exists in isolation. We are continuously shaped by and shaping those around us. Our actions, words, and even thoughts affect others in ways both obvious and subtle. When we truly recognize this interconnectedness, we naturally become more mindful of our impact. This recognition doesn't mean losing healthy boundaries or subsuming our needs to others. It suggests that our well-being is inextricably linked with the well-being of those around us. The happier, more peaceful, and more free our community members are, the more supportive the environment is for our own flourishing. The Zen approach to communication offers particular wisdom for navigating the complexities of human interaction. In the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha included right speech as an essential aspect of practice, recognizing the power of words to either harm or heal, to create conflict or understanding. Right speech isn't about rigid rules, but about bringing awareness to our communication, noticing our intentions, considering the impact of our words, speaking from presence rather than reactivity. It includes aspects like truthfulness, kindness, timeliness, and usefulness, asking us to consider not just what we say, but how and why we say it. In Zen practice, periods of silence called session, literally gathering the mind, help us observe the habits of speech and thought that often operate unconsciously. By temporarily stepping back from conversation, we can notice the impulses that drive our communication, the need to be right, to be liked, to fill space, to control outcomes. This awareness creates the possibility for more conscious and compassionate expression. When we do speak, Zen encourages us to come from a place of presence, rather than rehearsed positions or automatic reactions. This presence allows for genuine dialogue, a mutual exploration of understanding, rather than parallel monologues where neither person is truly listening to the other. The quality of our listening is equally important. Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh coined the term deep listening to describe a way of attending to others with our full presence, without interruption, judgment, or planning our response. This quality of attention creates space for the speaker to express themselves more fully and for genuine understanding to emerge. This deep listening isn't limited to human conversation, but extends to all of life. By attending closely to the natural world, to our bodies, to the subtle currents of experience, we open ourselves to wisdom that isn't available through conceptual thinking alone. As one Zen saying puts it, when walking, walk. When eating, eat. This seemingly simple instruction points to the profound practice of giving our complete attention to each activity, each encounter. The Zen perspective on social justice offers valuable guidance for working toward a more equitable and compassionate world. While some misunderstand meditation as a purely personal practice focused on inner peace, the Zen tradition has a rich history of social engagement, with many teachers working actively to address poverty, discrimination, war, and environmental destruction. This engagement arises not from ideology, but from the direct perception of our fundamental interconnectedness. When we truly understand that there is no separate self, the suffering of others becomes our concern, not through moral obligation, but through the recognition that their well-being and ours are inseparable. A Zen approach to social justice emphasizes both inner and outer transformation. Without inner work, our efforts to change society may replicate the very patterns of aggression, self-righteousness, and othering that we're trying to overcome. Without outer engagement, our inner practice may become a form of spiritual bypassing that ignores real suffering in the world. The integration of these dimensions is captured in the Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The activities may look the same from the outside, but they're informed by a different understanding, a clearer perception of our interconnectedness and responsibility to one another. This clarity doesn't lead to rigid certainty about political positions, but to a more nuanced, compassionate engagement that recognizes the complexity of social issues and the humanity of all involved, even those with whom we deeply disagree. It allows for firm commitment to equity and justice, while maintaining an open heart toward those who see things differently. The Zen approach to conflict, whether personal or social, emphasizes understanding the roots of hostility rather than responding in kind. When met with aggression, our instinctive reaction is often to become aggressive ourselves or to withdraw in fear. Zen practice helps us find a middle way, remaining present and engaged without either attacking or abandoning the field. This capacity to stay present in difficult situations develops through meditation practice. As we sit quietly observing our reactions without being controlled by them, we build the inner resources to respond skillfully rather than reactively in challenging circumstances. We learn to notice when we're becoming angry or afraid, and to reconnect with our breath and body rather than being carried away by emotion. This doesn't mean suppressing feelings or adopting a facade of detachment. It means feeling fully while maintaining enough awareness to choose our response rather than being driven by conditioning. This creates the possibility for genuine dialogue and understanding across differences. The Zen perspective on leadership offers valuable guidance for those in positions of influence, whether in families, workplaces, communities, or larger systems. Traditional Zen emphasizes the teacher-student relationship as a vehicle for transmission of wisdom, with teachers embodying the qualities they aim to cultivate in others. This embodiment is central to effective leadership in any context. As the saying goes, your actions speak so loudly, I cannot hear what you're saying. When leaders live the values they espouse, presence, compassion, integrity, service, they create a field of influence that affects everyone around them more powerfully than words alone. Zen leadership also emphasizes the balance of compassion and clarity. Compassion without clarity can become enabling or indulgent, while clarity without compassion can be harsh or rigid. The integration of these qualities allows leaders to hold high standards while supporting growth, to be firm about boundaries without diminishing others' dignity. This balance is reflected in the practice of upaya, or skillful means, the capacity to adapt one's approach to the needs and readiness of different individuals. A skilled teacher or leader doesn't apply the same method to everyone, but discerns what will be most helpful for each person in their particular circumstances. The Zen perspective on creativity offers valuable insights for artistic expression in any medium. While some approaches to art emphasize self-expression or mastery of technique, Zen points to something more fundamental: the quality of presence we bring to the creative process. In traditional Zen arts like calligraphy, painting, flower arrangement, and poetry, the emphasis is not on producing impressive works, but on the state of mind from which creation emerges. Years of training develop technical skill, but the highest expression comes when the artist disappears into the act, when there is no separation between creator and creation. A story illustrates this understanding. A master painter was commissioned to paint a bamboo forest for a wealthy patron. He spent years observing bamboo in all seasons and conditions, in rain and sun, in wind and stillness, at dawn and dusk. When he finally took up his brush, he completed the painting in a single fluid session. The patron, watching him work, exclaimed, "How can you paint so quickly after making me wait so long?" The artist replied, "It took years for the bamboo to grow within me." The painting itself was merely the final moment of that growth. This story points to the integration of preparation and spontaneity that characterizes Zen creativity. The rigorous development of skill creates the conditions for freedom, for the falling away of self-consciousness that allows direct expression to emerge. This approach to creativity isn't limited to traditional arts, but applies to any creative endeavor, from cooking to coding, from writing to designing, from teaching to parenting. Whatever the medium, the quality of attention we bring to the process shapes both the outcome and our experience of creating it. In all these areas of life, from our relationship with nature to our approach to creativity, from our engagement with social justice to our navigation of conflict, Zen offers practices that transform our experience not by changing external conditions, but by shifting how we relate to them. This inside-out approach doesn't diminish the importance of working for positive change in the world. It suggests that such work is most effective when it arises from clear seeing and compassionate presence rather than reaction and self-righteousness. The journey of Zen isn't about reaching a final destination or achieving a permanent state. It's about an ongoing process of awakening, of seeing more clearly, of responding to life with greater freedom and compassion. It doesn't promise a life without difficulties, but offers practices that transform our relationship to difficulty, allowing us to meet life's inevitable challenges with greater ease and clarity. As we walk this path, we discover that what we've been seeking, peace, meaning, connection, isn't found elsewhere, but in the quality of our attention to what's already here. The extraordinary is revealed within the ordinary when we learn to see with fresh eyes and to meet life directly, without the veil of habitual thinking. In this direct meeting, we find the freedom and peace that have been our birthright all along. May this exploration of Zen wisdom serve as a doorway to your own direct experience, your own discovery of the peace and clarity that are always available when we learn to be fully present for this precious human life. The path is walked one step at a time, one breath at a time, one moment of presence at a time. And in this very moment, right here, the journey both begins and reaches completion. Thank you for walking this path with us at Moon Mind Temple. May the ancient wisdom of Zen continue to illuminate your way through life's inevitable storms and sunshine. Remember that beyond all concepts and teachings lies your own direct experience, the true teacher that has been with you all along. We bow in gratitude to the lineage of teachers who have preserved these teachings, to all beings who support our practice, and to you for your sincere engagement with this timeless wisdom.